What's up, guys? We're back with another post Huddle podcast, and today I have a few guests with me, and I have
Adam Hobbs.
Hayden Mclaurin.
Adam and Hayden. They were with us yesterday at FCA. Hayden shared his testimony, and Adam took us through James 1 5 through 11. So, if you wouldn't mind, Hayden, would you go and just give us a little rundown of your testimony that you talked about last night?
Oh yeah, I can do that. The main point, my whole testimony was really just having faith and trusting God's plan, like through the ups and downs, no matter what. Like He'll always be there for us. Like He's your best friend, because your parents, your friends, your family, they're not always gonna be around. So like I've learned through my life to just really trust God and just pray and go to Him when I know He's the only person you can really rely on, and just put your whole faith in Him. Is the biggest takeaway from last night.
Yes, that's a big thing that a lot of people nowadays they don't really understand. Like just leaning on God and just giving him your all and just relying on Him in all times and needs and when you're in your in your highs too. But like I said yesterday, we read James 1 5 through 11, and I'll go ahead and read that for you all to get us started. James 5 reads, "If any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable is all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant, its blossoms falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away, even while they go about their business." So, Adam, if you would like to, would you go and just talk about, because you entitled it Seeking God's Wisdom. Just give us a little rundown what we talked about last night.
Yeah, of course. Reading through 5 through 11, we kind of have two sections there.
Mm-hmm.
5 through 8, it kind of calls us to seek God's wisdom. And then that ending section, 9 through 11, kind of talks about kind of rejoicing and, what it looks like to rejoice in, times of trials and tribulations.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like what we talked about in the first week with Noah, where he led us through that, as Christians, we'll always go through those trials and tribulations. We'll always have those in our lives. So James is going to continue in verse 5 through 8 and tell us that at some point in our lives, no matter where we are, no matter like what's going on, there will be a time where we lack wisdom, and in verse 5, he tells us to, like, if any of you lack wisdom, I went over this last night with that. It shouldn't be if, it really should be when, because at some point we will all lack wisdom. And he tells us, basically, when you lack that wisdom, go to God, seek God, because it tells us that He gives generously. And so, kind of like what Noah talked about, those trials and tribulations, like that's what James is telling us, that when we face those times, like that is when we need that wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we're called to go to God and seek His wisdom. And then I kind of talked about how God gives it without reproach. So reproach is to address someone in such a way as to express disapproval or disappointment. So in verse 5, when it tells us that, God gives us wisdom without reproach, that means that He doesn't have any disapproval in us. That, like, when we go to Him in prayer and when we ask Him for that wisdom in the time of need, that He isn't disappointed in us. In fact, He wants us to do that. Like, that gives Him great joy when we go to Him and ask for that wisdom. And then I had a quote from Matthew Henry, and he said, "We should not pray so much for the removal of an affliction as for wisdom to make a right use of it." So basically that's saying, when we're going through those trials and tribulations that Noah talked about last week, we shouldn't pray to God and ask for a way out. We shouldn't, spend our time of prayer saying, "God, I'm going through this trial. I'm going through this tribulation. Just get me out of it. Whatever way you can, the easiest way, preferably, just get me out of it." Instead, Matthew Henry, he tells us that we should pray for God to use this trial, to use this tribulation that we're facing, and that we should ask for wisdom, and that we can learn from this trial, we can grow from it, It can better our walk with Christ. And so that's kind of what James is getting at, that when we go to God for wisdom, that we're not asking to get out of anything, but to get through it, basically. So yeah, that's kind of that's the first section that he talks about. And then he mentions in 6 through 8, he kind of talks about that hindering wave, the doubter and the double-minded. And we kind of I talked about that last night. Where was it? Yeah, here it is. And so in verse 8, he talks about the double-minded. And it says that it compares the double-minded thinker to a wave in the sea. And one thing that stuck out from last night was that, it compared the doubter to the sea that's, unhindered. And it said that the doubter is without rest, and so is the sea. It said that the doubter is unstable, so is the sea. That the doubter is driven by wind, and so is the sea. And that it is capable of great destruction, and then so is the wind, or so is the sea. And then when we come to that double-minded in verse 8, right? Mm-hmm. You have to ask yourself, what does that mean, right? What does double-minded mean? Well, Adam Clark describes it as a man of two souls. So basically, someone who's double-minded is someone who has a soul for this earth and a soul for heaven. Someone who wants to continue to live, in their sinful ways on this earth because they love it. Sin, they get that after sin high that just they keep wanting to go back to. But then at the same time, they know, or they have that feeling in the back of their head that, maybe this heaven thing, this Jesus thing is actually real. Like, it's actually what I need, but I don't want to go away from the earth. So it's like they have a grasp on the earthly soul, but they have a reluctance to let their soul for heaven go. And that's kind of how James describes, when he uses that phrase double-minded, that's what he's telling us. He's telling us not to have that, not to live for both the earth and for heaven, but to choose. We have to choose to follow Christ. So that's kind of the first section, verses 5 through 8. So if you want to open it up, just have a little conversation about that section.
Yeah, that double-minded thing, that really, I like that a lot when you're talking about somebody who has a spirit for the world and to live to be in heaven. I feel like that was pretty good. I feel like that's that speaks to a lot of people now, in the world, just how they want to have that both, where they can live in the world and still be like, okay, well, I know Jesus is going to forgive me and I can still go to heaven. But I think he speaks on that, and I think I talked about this before. Somewhere in the Bible, he says lukewarm Christians are the worst ones. You know what you're supposed to be doing. You know what's right from wrong, but yet you still do it.
Right.
He said, I'd rather you be somebody who doesn't know me, and it's just not and just isn't living the right way, than for you to know me and know what's right, and you still do wrong. And I feel like that kind of touches on that, and I feel like that's big for a lot of people nowadays.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and one thing I said last night was the analogy of the living on the fence, where you have that 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in heaven, and that's the worst place you can be. If you're living for the world on a Saturday night, you're going out, having a party, drinking, getting drunk, all that stuff, and then you wake up Sunday morning and go to church. Are you really living that Christian life that God has called to you? And James tells us that no, you're not, because you have a soul for both. So.
Yeah. Another point that you had, I don't think you really touched on when you were just talking, but you said we should not doubt God because he never gave us a reason to doubt him. Mm-hmm. And I know some people might sit there and think about that and just say, well, he let this person in my life die, or he let this person die. Why? How is that not giving me doubt? You wanted to touch on that and talk about how that isn't doubt, how it's something else that God works in our life to help us with?
Yeah. So yeah, that little section is kind of verses 6 and 7. Whenever James tells us to pray faithfully, without doubt. And so, one of the point I had last night is it says we cannot doubt him because he has not given us any reason to doubt. And so, kind of with loss, I love to, we're always called to go to God for prayer, for asking him for things, stuff like that. We're always called to go. And so say you have a family member who is in bad health and you pray to him, God, like, please, watch over them, heal them. And God always has an answer for you. And his answer is either yes, no, or not now. And just because you pray for someone to be healed does not mean that the answer you deserve is yes. It's another point I touched on with the quote from Alexander the Great, where it says, the business is not what thou art fit to receive, but what it becometh me to give. Mm-hmm. So basically that's saying the prayer request that you're asking for, if God is going to answer it, it's not based on what you believe is right for you. It's what God sees is right for you. Mm-hmm. So if you're asking him to heal, say you have your mom has cancer. If you're asking him to heal your mom of cancer, and he sees that it's not fit for that to happen, he's going to answer no. That doesn't mean that we can doubt him. I mean, honestly, that means that we can place more trust in him because he has answered our prayer. Mm-hmm. And we see that throughout the Bible that God will always answer our prayers. He tells us that. But just because he will answer our prayers doesn't mean that we will always get the answer that we think we should get.
Yeah, that's I like that a lot. Just because I've heard people say that's the reason why they don't really trust in God, because he took this person out of my life. Why would I trust him? And honestly, I look at it as as you were saying, maybe that person who he took out of your life was meant to bring you to him, and you're just missing that. Because you're so stuck on he took him from me, so why would I trust in him? So I like how you described you went into there about that.
One point I can add from verse 5 that I liked is it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it'll be given to you. The thing that I like most is no matter what we've done, he will always when we go to him in prayer, he will always answer us. It's not like somebody if your friend, your friend does you wrong, well, I'm going to go ghost them because they did me wrong. No, you could go as far down the path, but then once you hit that wall and you realize, oh, I messed up, and you turn back to God, he's right there that instant you start praying, which is the best thing to realize, no matter what you do, even though we shouldn't want to do wrong, just when it happens just because we're human, then we know for God's always there. And just he's one prayer away to help us.
Yeah. And I think that goes back on the word reproach, where it says God doesn't reproach us. He doesn't have disappointment in us, because we know that's the reason why he sent Jesus down the cross for us, because he knows we're not perfect people, and he knows that we're going to sin. And he's always at that door next to us, just knocking, and it's leaving it up to us to let him in. Yeah, that's big. And then another point that our last point that I want to talk about, I don't know if Hayden had another point, but I think what kind of hit me strong last night was you don't ask God to take away our trials, but instead teach us something while we're in that trial.
Right.
Because I find myself a lot when I'm in going through something where it's, God, help me get out of this. Help me get out of this. Basically take this away. And I'm not looking at it as, well, this is a point where I need to be being taught something. I can learn something from this. And I feel if you're in your trials and you're just having that mindset where I'm going to learn something from this, I feel you can see that as a whole different perspective of praying when your prayer be different. Instead of, I said, get me out of this. Yeah. Show me what you want me to learn from this. Absolutely. And I feel that's big. People I don't really hear God speaking to me. He's I feel that's a big way he speaks to us through trials, just showing us what he wants us to get out of something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest things is that we should ask God to, when we're going through those trials, we should be like, God, what is your intended purpose for this? Instead of saying, God, get me out of this, God has put that trial in your life for a reason. So if God has put it there for you, then you shouldn't be saying, God, get me out of this. I don't want to be here. No, because he's put that there for you. He's that whatever trial he's put up against you, it's there for a reason. It's there to build your faith and build you up as a believer. So that's definitely something that a lot of believers, myself included, have a hard time dealing with, is instead of saying, God, how can I get out of this, saying, God, how can you get me through this? So
yeah, I think it's also like your mindset. If you change your mindset from why God to ask, then you go to ask him, well, how can you help? How can I grow through this, or how can this make me closer to you? Because I know from personal experiences, some of the trials I've been through, has brought me closer to God. Like, I'm glad I went through those. I'm not glad that things happened, but I'm glad, like, I went through them because it brought me closer to God and it made me, like, open my eyes to realize, like, that's when you need to rely on him as most and go to him, like, the most, or go to him at all times, because he's there for you and he wants to build you and be the best person that you can be.
Exactly. Yes, I mean, that's all I have for that. Like, note wise, I took for first section. It was like the first section was pretty good. It was pretty nice. It's covered a few things that a lot of people struggle with, like today.
Yeah, and then we kind of get into that second section of what we kind of read, the 9 through 11, where it kind of talks about rejoicing in those trials and tribulations and how we're supposed to rejoice. And, it kind of talks about rejoicing with humility and in humility. So one thing that I have is that, Richard Linsky has a quote that says, which I thought this was one of the most powerful quotes when I was, reading my commentaries, reading, the scripture, when I was preparing my lesson. Like, this quote hit me, like, big time. And it says, "As the poor brother forgets all his earthly poverty, so the rich brother forgets all his earthly riches. And by faith in Christ, the two are equals." When I read that, like, I took a moment. I paused. I reflected. I was like, wow, like that just blew me away, because it just shows, especially in today's time, like, all we're worried about is how much money we can make. All that, like, our financial standings, and especially in today's economy. I mean, like, you're gonna worry about it with how much housing costs, stuff like that. But I feel like that's all we're worried about. And so when I read that, I was like, wow, it doesn't matter if I have no money or I have all the money in the world. If the person who's outside of the justice house, begging, is a believer, then we are equal. Like, we are equal because we are brothers in Christ. So, that's something that it talks about in that, verses 9 through 11, and then it also talks about how, like I said, that both parties, like the low, the poor, and then the high or the rich, are to rejoice in God, and that our financial standings, whether we're rich or whether we're poor, they shouldn't have any bearing or any hold over our relationship with God, and they should also, like what Richard said, they should not have any hold or bearing over our relationship with other believers. Just because someone either has less money than you or has more money than you does not mean you can't talk to them in a Christian setting. Does not mean you cannot have a biblical conversation with them. It shouldn't matter what we have in the world as long as we both have Jesus in our hearts. That's what makes us brothers or sisters, and that's what allows us to have those conversations. And then it kind of went through, and it talked about how, like, the lowly, the low are to rejoice when God is exalting them. And I talked about, like, that's easy. I mean, I don't know about you, but anytime I've been low and God has lifted me up, He's exalted me, like, I'm praising Him 100 times out of 100, because, like, He's doing this great thing for me. He's lifting me up. But He also calls the rich or the high to rejoice in their humiliation, basically their humility. That when they are brought down by God, they're still called to rejoice in that. And I talked about it last night. That's super hard. When God is putting you through a trial that is meant to bring you down, it's hard to rejoice in that. But we see James tells us that that's what we're called to do. And so when we see that with, like, the low and the high, if the low is rejoicing and being exalted, then the high should rejoice with them for their exaltation. And so if the rich or the high is rejoicing in their humility, then the low should rejoice in their humility as well. Like, kind of be like one in the rejoicing of each other. And that's one way that can help rejoice through those trials and tribulations that you face. And then we saw at the end the picture of the flower. Where it said, that the flower raises up, it's beautiful, but then at the end, it fades away and it dies. And, it was talking about the rich in that scenario, because, the rich live lavish lives, they have the big houses, the nice cars, so you can see them, they're the flowers. But at the end, all that stuff goes away, it withers and it dies. But I kind of wanted to, flip it a little bit and say, like, this is our lives as Christians. You know, this is our lives as humans, honestly, to say that we're the flowers, we're each a different flower, and that as flowers, we're called to resemble the image of Christ. You know, as believers, we're called to portray Christ as best we can. You know, we're called to be perfect. And so, you know, I kind of flipped it and I said, like, you know, we're those flowers. So do we live like the flowers we're called to be? You know, do we live those Christian lives like we're called to be, that we are examples for the flowers around us? Or are we like weeds who try to resemble flowers, who will go out and party or commit those sinful desires and fall into temptation? I just, after that, I, you know, invited them, come, like, be that flower that God has called you to be. Like, put your trust in him and just resemble the image that he has put, you know, upon you.
Yeah. I like the analogy you use where you talk about that weed, how it, like, shows to be a flower, but it's truly, it's the one that's killing everything in the garden. Because honestly, I feel like, I mean, as y'all know, when I share my testimony, that's kind of what I fell into, like, being like an imposter, like showing, like, on the outside, well, you might be a Christian on the outside, but deep down, are you living that life that you're supposed to live? Are you being fruitful? Are you doing all the things that it talks about in the Bible of just being, like, just sharing the word of others and living it and showing it, not just speaking it? So that was pretty big when you said that. It kind of, like, touched home a little bit for me.
Something like I liked about the quote where, like, whether we're rich or poor, but we're all equal in Christ, like, that hit me. Like, it kind of opened my eyes and like me realize, like, it's, like, very true, because nowhere in the Bible does it say, well, there's an upper class to heaven, there's a middle class, and there's a lower class. Like, we're all equal in the eyes of God. We're all sinners who are saved by the blood of Jesus when he sent his son. It's like, it just made me realize, no matter, like, what you really do on this earth, like, it's all going to go away. Like, we could have all the money, like you said, be billionaires, all these nice cars, houses, everything. But, like, when you can't take that to heaven with you. So it's like, why put all your trust in everything in something that's going to eventually fade away? That and honestly could all be gone tomorrow.
Exactly.
But you know for a fact God will be there every step of the way in your life.
Yeah. And honestly, when you said it, so this summer I but I volunteered to be a Huddle leader at an FCA leadership camp with high school and middle school kids. And the first day the kids were there, there was this young man. I think he was in middle school. There was this poor man. I want to say poor. This man just sitting on the side of the school. He was just sitting there. He had, like, all his stuff with him. And mind you, we haven't had any classes, nothing. And this kid, he walks up to this man and he starts asking this man about Jesus, telling this man about Jesus. Wow. He's in middle school, and I was like, wow, this is, like, it's eye opening, because, like, you don't, these middle schoolers, they're on fire to share it with people who might not be as fortunate as they are. So that was just eye opening to me. It was really cool to see that just take place in that young man's life.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the easiest things to do is when you're walking down the street and you see somebody, you know, who's living on the street. The easiest thing to do is turn your head and keep walking. You know, but they're created in the image of God. They are created the same way that we were, and so to, you know, like that, to go up and have that conversation is just so powerful, because it shows that no matter if he's poor and I'm rich or the other way around, we are both equal, you know, in Christ.
Kind of what Hayden was saying about a poor man and a rich man. Their value might not be equal earthly, like, value wise, but spiritually, that poor man could be richer than the earthly man, the rich man, just because. And I feel like when you're rich and you're on the high, you're going well. Like, you don't really, I'm not saying not everybody, but people don't really turn to God when you're experiencing good in your life, because you're joyful. You don't really have much to worry about, so you don't really have I'm gonna pray to God, because you're doing well. You don't technically at that point, you don't, quote unquote, need a God. Yeah. And the poor men, they don't have much, so they're at that point in their life, they're low, and they're praying to God, help me get out of this, showed me all this, and I just feel like it speaks volumes for like a rich man just to. There's a book in the Bible. I don't remember the king's name, but there was this poor man who sat outside this king's temple, and he walked over him every single day and didn't say a word to him. And at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, they both were dead. The king is looking up at this poor man, and he's just sitting there looking up at him. They didn't say he was in heaven, but they're saying he was in. What's the word they used? He was in a good place, and this king is in torture. He's down there. He's torturing, and he's just like, why? How is he? How was I? I was a king, and I'm down here suffering, and this poor man is up there, not suffering at all, and that just speaks like. It's not easy to go and just share with a poor man. You don't know this person, but just doing that, when you have like high value in the earth, just doing that, that's pretty cool. Like just to share with other people who aren't as I can't even think of my word. Fortunate, exactly. Fortunate as you.
Absolutely.
Verse 10 of James 1, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like the wildfire. Kind of just like goes back to just don't put your full faith in something of this world, because no matter what, not even money, just like a relationship with that's for this world, or like playing a sport, like you give your all to this thing in this world, but you never know like when it's like ends. But you know, like when you're in, but if you put your faith in God, you know, like when your time is done on earth, then that's when, like, when you go to heaven and you get to celebrate and rejoice knowing that you lived a life full of God and full of, and just praising Him.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to thank Adam and Hayden for coming out today and just sharing a little bit. Hayden sharing a little bit about his testimony, and Adam taking the time to share with us about what he talked to us about at FCA. We'll be back next week. But here recently we have post-chapel podcast taking place tomorrow. So if you see this, every Wednesday, 12:12 chapel. Every Monday at 8:08 we have FCA. And I believe every Tuesday at 7:07 we have a prayer team meeting. So yeah, if you're on campus and you're ever looking for something to do, we have lots of things to do to get connected. We also have G groups you can plug in, find a G group that fits you the best. And yeah, so I hope everybody has a good rest of your day and love on Jesus.
Yurt.